Hello, everybody. This is Scott Harvey.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing super fantastic, and you?
Good.
I'm interrupting right now. It has nothing to do with the CAG meeting, but it does have to do with WSF. Uh, this last weekend, having one boat scheduled for 3 days in a row was challenging. The only reason I'm bringing it up here is I trust that the ferry system knows that this coming weekend Strawberry Festival is the biggest weekend of the year for Vashon. And I trust that you've done whatever it takes to guarantee we will have ferries this weekend. I mean, crew. In other words, if a ferry breaks down, we totally understand you can't control that here. But uh, having crew available so that Strawberry Festival will not be disrupted, I think is a once a year thing that I'm sure WSF can guarantee. Right, Hadley?
Guarantee is a strong word. I'm actually doing double duty here and drafting an email that I'm about to send to our Ferry Advisory Committee members, and I'm happy to copy all of you on it as well. That's announcing that if sort of a cascading chain of events that are occurring right now in our system, which is why you were down to one boat this weekend. We didn't have that third boat there that's been there during the week. The Yakima, which is usually assigned to the Anacortes San Juan Islands route, is out of service. So we moved the Chelan up north to cover service in the San Juan Islands last weekend, and then moved the south, the vessel that had been the third boat on the Fauntleroy Vashon Southwest route to Mukilteo Clinton, which is a significant downsizing for them, but does maintain two boat service for Mukilteo Clinton, which is why when we didn't have crew for your second vessel, you were on one boat service for a while, which we know was terrible for all of you. So we just made the decision about an hour ago that knowing it's Strawberry Festival, if we are not able to return the Yakima service in the San Juan Islands by Thursday, we're going to move the south back down to the Triangle and we have crew lined up to run it to be able to run three boat service through the weekend, which will put the Mukilteo Clinton route on one boat service, which isn't ideal for them either, but we think it's really important to prioritize Vashon for this as your biggest event of the year, and the fact that you've been on reduced service for many years now, and we're sending an announcement out to elected officials and FACs and others. I'm actually going to probably do it during the meeting, so you'll see it come through. And that's the decision. In terms of crewing the additional vessel and the two permanent boats on the route, we're doing the best we can. We have doubled up some positions where we have crew available to do that, to provide redundancy. Of course, if somebody calls out at the last minute, which is what have happened this past weekend, our dispatchers will just make calls until they're able to fill those positions. And sometimes that is a bit out of our control if we're not able to fill the vacancies. We can't sail short. Last weekend, the dispatch team, over the course of 4 days, made over 1,200 phone calls to fill the vacant positions system-wide. So that's the plan for this weekend. Our goal and our hope is that you will have three boat service through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the festival.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Hadley. I really appreciate you guys stepping up. I'm glad that is going to happen.
Thank your FAC members and Islanders for Ferry Action. You've been advocating really heavily for the route and for this weekend in particular in the events. So we're going to do our best to make it happen.
Oh, great. The other thing here too is the announcements have been coming out really late. I mean, like the following day from things that happen. And so again, you can't do anything about whether you have a crew or whether you have a boat here, but I'm really hoping that you can double check, where it's getting the announcements out. I mean, to let us know what's going on. Which we know it's tough, and we accept the fact that there could be issues here, but we'd like to be informed when there's an issue, as opposed to just kind of wondering what's happening.
Yep. Thank you. I'll pass it on to our customer service team. We did add a few info agents for the weekend as well, knowing it's going to be a pretty busy weekend. So hopefully that'll help. But most of the time we have one web agent on duty who's the one who sends those email alerts out and text alerts. So it's kind of hard for them to keep up with the weekend, like this past weekend where there were many things happening simultaneously system-wide. But I'll pass that along to them that they should pay specific attention to this route.
Yeah, well,
Thanks.
thanks, Hadley.
Thank you, Scott. We know ferry services is top of mind, especially right now. So thank you for asking those questions. We are ready to get started with our community advisory group meeting for the Fauntleroy Ferry Terminal Replacement Project. Thank you all for spending another beautiful summer evening with us. We're really excited to dig into the content we have tonight. For those community members joining us, my name is Laura Levisonaire-Miller. I will be helping to facilitate tonight's conversation. And before we start, just want to welcome those of you who are joining our meeting today. You will be in listen-only mode, and if you have any questions or comments during the meeting, you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll try to look at that periodically. We also encourage you to email your comments to the project team, and Haley will drop that email into the chat. As a reminder, we are recording this meeting and we'll be posting the video on the project website for anyone who couldn't attend live. We just have a few friendly reminders for using Zoom. I know this is old hat by now, but just a reminder about the features that we use during these meetings. We'll use chat during the discussion portion of the meeting. And then here is an overview of our agenda. We're going to continue our conversation on key project elements that will inform the level 3 screening process with a focus on the traffic analysis. So I know you all received a copy of that by email last week, and we can again copy that into the chat so you have it handy. But first, Dave will share an update on the status of the Good to Go and Advanced Ticketing Study, which will be the topic of our next meeting. And we have a few minutes to recap what we've heard on the environmental analysis and hear any final questions or comments on this information. And then we'll spend, like I said, most of the time digging into the results of the traffic analysis, and we've reserved time at the end for conversation and answering any questions that you have. Okay, with that, Hadley will remind us of kind of where we're at in the project timeline.
Okay, well, as many of you remember, we're in the middle of our level 3 screening phase of the project, where we have the set of refined alternatives that we developed, and we're now going through and presenting a lot of the analysis that's been done over the last several months in certain areas related to our screening criteria. We talked about environmental at the last meeting. We'll revisit that a little bit today. And today we're going to spend most of the meeting on the traffic study and some of the other major topics coming up in our future meetings. And then we'll move into the actual screening process later this fall. And the goal here is to arrive at a single alternative that we can carry forward into the environmental review starting in early 2025. That process is expected to last a couple of years, and then we are still on track to begin construction and work through design and construction in the 2027-2029 biennium. This is just another view that you've all seen before, but it's a helpful depiction, visual depiction of the process we've been going through for the last several years, where we started out with a number of alternatives that ranged all across the board, many ideas, some pretty far out of the box, some less so, for how we could replace the Fauntleroy terminal. And then we've been going through the screening process to narrow the range of alternatives to the existing dock location and to the set of refined alternatives that we have today that looks at different configurations of the dock and the dock size and the process where we're at in level 3 screening that will get us to a single alternative to advance into further environmental review and then design and construction. Are there any questions about the process or the timeline? I know most of this is review of what we covered last time, but I just want to make sure everyone knows where we're at. Okay, that move on to the next slide, which I think is another depiction of where we've been and where we're going. So right now, as part of level 3, those darker green boxes on the right-hand side of the slide show the topics that we'll be discussing today and that we discussed at the last meeting: the environmental analysis, the traffic analysis, Then our next several meetings will cover the good to go and advanced ticketing study. Then cost and construction will likely combine into a single meeting. Those topics, those 5 topics in the middle column there, right middle column, are the ones that you all identified as the highest interest when we discussed our screening criteria. And we want to make sure that you all understand the analysis that's been done before we begin to apply the results of these studies to do the actual screening and apply the screening criteria. And that'll allow us to identify an alternative to advance. And then we'll summarize all of this work in a draft Pell study report, share that out for you to review, and then carry that report as documentation of this Pell study, planning and environmental linkages study, into the NEPA process, the further environmental review, and then into design and construction. So we know you've been on this journey with us now for several years, and we think we're nearing the finish line and hope to wrap this up by the end of the year and to wrap up the Pell study report in early 2025. So with that, I think I'm handing it over to you, Dave, the next section.
All right, thanks, Hadley. So before we dig into tonight's meeting, I wanted to share an update on where we're at with Good to Go and advanced ticketing. Again, we'll take some questions at the end on this topic, but I have one slide here I want to share with you all. Our consultant team has been focused on developing the traffic analysis that we're sharing tonight, but that analysis sets the foundation and provides the data we need to evaluate Good to Go. So we have a few goals for this work, and they include determining the feasibility of Good to Go and the Wave to Go advanced ticketing at the terminal. We want to evaluate reductions in processing time and improving the customer service, and identify potential policy changes, capital costs, and schedule for implementation. Those are all important things that we need to look at, and we'll talk about those at our next meeting. These are the goals that will guide us towards understanding if Good to Go is something we can embrace. As one of our standing directives, we are also looking at ways to improve operational efficiency at our terminals. Many of our customers already purchase their tickets in advance. And so as part of this study, we're looking at ways to enhance the current Wave to Go ticketing as we explore the Good to Go technology. We're also evaluating multiple options for all level 3 alternatives and measuring process time using the traffic model data that you see tonight. So the Good to Go study does go beyond just time savings. We also need to carefully consider what this means from a policy perspective, how Good to Go could change fares, what that means for our customers who rely on our service. And we're also considering important factors like cost and the time it would take to implement. So we understand your frustration about the delay in this work, and we too are eager to have this information as we need to understand if Good to Go is viable for Fauntleroy. As always, we remain committed to providing you with the time you need to review the full study and to have a fruitful conversation at our next meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marcia, who's going to answer some remaining questions about the environmental analysis. Marcia?
Thanks, David. At our last meeting, we shared the environmental analysis, the work that we did to evaluate how the level 3 alternatives interact with key environmental resources, including potential benefits and the impacts to the surrounding environment. We developed this analysis by reviewing public data, conducting limited field work in the terminal, and considering input from communities, agencies, and the tribes and our tribal partners. Our analysis focuses on the environmental elements in the level 3 screening criteria that are most crucial to meeting the project's purpose and need. So with that, we thank you, everyone, for the feedback that you shared on this information. And this is just a recap, though, of the main items that we heard back from all of you and from our technical advisory group members. First, there are questions about environmental mitigation and impacts of construction, including noise, air, and light pollution. There is interest in overwater coverage during and after construction and impacts to treaty fishing rights. Questions about the scour bowl, eelgrass, and macroalgae. Interest in how dock height and length relate to sea level rise and light penetration. interest in how the quality of piles affect debris under the dock, and emphasis on protecting fish and wildlife near the terminal. We'll be using this information to apply the screening criteria in level 3 alternatives, and then identify an alternative to advance into environmental review. So, Laura, I'll let you wage the Q&A if there's any for us about these items we just covered.
Thank you, Marcia. Yeah, we just wanted to create some space and answer any lingering questions now that you have all had a bit more time to dig into the environmental analysis. Marty, I see your hand is up. Marty, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So thank you very much for all of that. That certainly covers all of the feedback that I've heard too. Just some a minor thing, and that is that on section 2.6.1.2, you say Cove Park is managed by Seattle Parks and Recs. That's actually wrong. It's managed by the King County Wastewater Division, and they manage the art as well as the property, and it's owned still by SDOT or Seattle, but that's just a minor point. And the other thing is just you said it's unlikely that the construction will physically occupy Cove Park, and I we don't know, nobody knows, but I just wanted to alert you to, maybe know this already, but it's been 3 times it's been used by the wastewater division for important upgrades, and they've closed it, and it was closed for years during the rebuild, and the community accepted all of that with grace, saying, it'll come back and we'll be okay.
Well, thanks for relaying that, and we'll make that correction in our report about the ownership of the
It's
property
minor.
there.
Yeah.
And again, who manages it? Because they're that's often the way it is. There are 2 different parties involved. One may own it, and another one may manage it. And I think we've been transparent in other meetings that I think I remember even responding to a question at the last meeting about, will construction affect Cove Park? And we see that there will be some times, due to facilitate and make sure that our public is safe, that we will have to close parts of Cove Park. And it may not be for a long period of time, but for certain work activities that could occur. So at that time, we, as you have said, that the community demonstrated in the past, we would seek your grace during those times that we're doing something to both keep you safe and then also accomplish the project.
Okay.
Thanks, Marty.
Marty, comments or questions on the environmental analysis? Well, we have Marcia here for the meeting, so we can always come back to her. But with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Mark Bandy to talk about the traffic study.
All right, thanks, Laura. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all again. As Laura just said, we're excited here to talk about the traffic analysis results, and which you saw in the memo sent out last week. So hopefully that was enough time for you to review it, and we're going to hit some of the key highlights of it over the next few slides. And then, as Laura said earlier, we have some time at the end to talk about any clarifying questions or comments that you've either seen in the memo or share tonight. So with that, we're going to the next slide. So I wanted to start off just with a reminder about where this relates to the purpose and need. You will recall that one of the purpose and need items is to improve operational efficiency. And really what that's about is providing support and reliable service while meeting service levels that are projected for the route as described in the 2040 long range plan for Washington State Ferries. So the traffic analysis helps us look at a couple of aspects in evaluating the degree that alternatives meet the purpose and need. And those are specifically the time to unload and load ferries, as well as the extent of queuing and how that may look along the shoulder holding lane on Fauntleroy Way. And I just wanted to reiterate a point that Dave mentioned, that this really provides this foundation for then applying and evaluating what good to go and wave to go options might look like with respect to these two operating efficiency criteria. Go to the next slide. So here's a slide that's just putting that criteria as well as the performance factors combined in the same look. So again, the operational efficiency aspect and improving that. Talking about things like dwell time, ability to process vehicles efficiently, which will then relate to certainly maintaining on-time performance. And again, we'll look in case of performance specifically at maintaining or improving ferry schedule reliability, which relates to the load and unloading time and process. And then the how does an alternative perhaps change vehicle queuing on Fauntleroy Way, which also relates not just operational efficiency from a ferry loading perspective, but also potential upland and community effects and customer experience. The next slide. One other contextual things to note is how this work compares to the no-build option. The no-build option is the option that only maintains the dock and terminal berthing structures that are in a manner that keeps the terminal operating. This option does not address the purpose and need, including the important aspect of replacing the terminal with a higher dock to address rising sea level. WSF considers this no-build option during the Pell process with the other alternatives as a baseline for the evaluation. Sets up also meets the requirement of going into how the environmental review needs to occur under both the national and state level policy acts. Okay, so now we'll talk about a few things for contextually around operating efficiently. So most of you all be familiar with this, but audience out there may not be. In the case of load and unload time, the on-time performance target that the way WSF measured it is that if trips depart within 10 minutes of the scheduled departure time, that's considered on time. They have a system-wide on-time performance goal for 95%. Looking at the Fauntleroy the triangle route, you can see we've put in here the most recent on-time performance information. This is pre-pandemic and on the 3-boat schedule. You can see it's 94% in 2020, 93% in 2019, when that 3-boat revised service was updated, and see about 90% prior to that. So just kind of gives you a background of kind of where the route has been sitting with respect to on-time performance. And then in terms of queuing, you're all familiar with this, but there is the shoulder holding lane. It is along Fauntleroy Way. You can see it in the graphic on the right, southbound direction, and that holds approximately 143 vehicles. And one of the things that to me again reiterate there is that longer queues can affect the operational efficiency, safety, and community and customer experience. The next slide, Haley. Okay, so introducing our methodology and approach to the traffic analysis, we use a common transportation analysis software. It's called GISIM. That's the name and the title there. It's used on all sorts of projects to evaluate that from transportation performance. We are, of course, looking at loading and unload time and queue length over the weekday afternoon period when we see the highest volume sailings. We are analyzing things in the matter of the 3-boat schedule, the revised schedule that was in place in 2019 to 2020. We are basing the traffic analysis on the Issaquah class ferries, which hold 124 vehicles. And we've analyzed a period of 2 consecutive sailings. The first is a route that does Fauntleroy, Southworth, Vashon, to be followed by Fauntleroy, Vashon, Southworth sailing. There's an average of 25 minutes between those sailings, and the dwell times are 20 and 18 minutes respectively. We also then use the model to help us analyze the queuing along Fauntleroy Way during the afternoon weekday periods, excuse me. And then we've also taken another approach to look at queuing across all sailings on both weekdays and weekends. Again, thinking about with the 3-boat schedule and looking out to, excuse me, year 2040. And so those results are in the traffic memo. We'll touch on this in a couple slides. Go to the next slide. So we have a couple of snapshots from the model that we're going to just talk through and show in case you've never seen a VISIM model or microsimulation model and what it looks like. So just as an example here, you can see we have Fauntleroy Way and the ferry terminal represented. Fauntleroy Way is running from the top portion of the screen diagonally down to the right. You'll see along Fauntleroy Way, we've got buses on Fauntleroy Way represented in the traffic model. On the holding lane side, you can see that there's vehicles that they queue up. There's gaps between them that match where the driveway or park entrance, no stopping standing locations are. So that's why you see those gaps there. So I can reflect that. You see we have toll booths, which are white rectangular shapes with a blue top. And then you can see vehicles queued up on the dock as they await their loading time. And then departing off the dock, you see vehicles unloading. And at the intersection itself, you'll see how the model replicates an officer control or a simple signal. Green bar is showing that this is a time when the unloading process is happening and traffic on Fauntleroy is stopped. We can go to the next slide. And this is a different view. It's the same model process. This is looking out towards the dock. So see some of the similar items here. What's different here, this is showing how, if you look at the intersection of Fauntleroy Way and the terminal, you'll see this is when unload traffic has been stopped temporarily to allow the Fauntleroy traffic to move. You also, if you look closely in here, you will see pedestrians that are walking along the southern edge of the dock. In the load and unload process, they will have come first off before the vehicles do. So they walk at a different pace than vehicles. They're just now in this snapshot point in time, they are about halfway down the dock and walking towards the Fauntleroy intersection. And then with that, we're about to show a short 30-second video simulation. So you can actually see that the cars move, the people walk and all that. It's a very small subset of the overall simulation that occurs in the model. And as we introduce this and show that, walk through that, it'll be pretty quick. It's running at like 6 times real-time speed, just so it's the way it looks and is operated. So you can see the vehicles moving. In this case, if you look, you'll see we're in the load process. If you look at it, you'll even see that it reflected a vehicle going into one of the unload lanes, the way the ferry terminal operators do that. It's met during the load process. So this is what's helping us measure time through the toll booth, total of what unload and load times for all the different modes that need to get on, as well as assessing the queuing out. And when that's wrapped up, we'll move on to the next slide and talk through the results. Okay. All right, let's talk about what that model then combines and outputs for us. So the first chart we have here is the total of the unload and loading time for pedestrians, bicycles, vehicles, that entire process. One thing I mentioned on the traffic model, we don't just run that one time, we run that model 10 times and combine the results, average them across. The model does reflect, tries to do some redistribution of arrival times and stuff like that for vehicle flows and stuff. So you kind of average those together. So it's not just a one-time run. And that's what's presented here. Or to the chart, you'll see the 2 dashed lines across the top are showing where the dwell time is for the first sailing, second sailing. The left axis of the chart is showing time in minutes. And so then for the first set of alternatives that we're talking about tonight, you'll see that total time working from left to right. Alternative A is the dock that's just slightly smaller than the no build, so it takes a little bit longer. The no build is the second column, that is the current holding size. That's also alternative A1 size. And you'll see that sits around 19 minutes. And then to the right of that, you see alternatives B, B3, B1, and B2, and alternative C. And those all have obviously more holding on dock, therefore downstream of the toll booth. And so we see a reduction in the total load and unload time. And then this next chart is same base information. This just is doing presenting the information in a different way, which is how much time is saved from an alternative, or how does it relate, I should say, to the no build or alternative A1. So in this case, the no build, you don't see it's a 0, so there's no bar. If you go to the left, alternative A, since it takes a little bit longer, that actually this kind of chart shows up as a negative number. It's a little bit longer, so therefore it's negative savings. You go to the right and you see alternatives B, B3, B1, B2, and C, all as a positive savings. So this is showing you the difference between that load times. All right, now we'll move on to analyzing queue lengths. And so we put the level 3 screening criteria up here again, which is how does the alternative change if they're queuing on Fauntleroy Way? And again, reiterate some of the considerations. The first one is that with respect to operational efficiency, that because it's a single holding way, and we have 2 destinations, vehicles bound for those destinations are queued together until they get to the terminal. And so one of the issues that you cannot sort in the holding lane safely out on Fauntleroy Way. You have to wait till they get to the terminal. And again, we're repeating the holding lane capacity and some of the implications of what longer queuing impacts with respect to efficiency. And so the next chart will show our assessment of looking out in the future at likelihood of queuing at different points along Fauntleroy Way. Okay, so in this chart, we've got a lot of information on this chart. So this is looking at queue lengths at different points along Fauntleroy Way under the different alternatives. You'll see a column that is, the first column adjacent to each of the alternatives is just immediately upstream of the entrance to the terminal. So that's what those numbers are. And then we have location 1 is at approximately southwest Cloverdale Street. That is about 1,400 feet upstream of the entrance to the terminal. And then we have a second location, location 2, that is at the northern parking lot entrance at Lincoln Park. It is approximately 3,000 feet up Fauntleroy Way. And so then we have corresponding likelihood of sailings being seeing a queue to those different locations. You will see a range in the percentages. And one of the ways we looked at this was under a lower demand set of numbers out in the 2040 horizon year versus a higher demand scenario, trying to there reflect that there's so May, October type of season versus maybe the fall or winter months where there's less demand out there. So that's what that range is representing. So I'll just give an example and talk through location 1 on weekdays. So you'll see in alternative A, we've estimated that alternative could see 37 to 40% of the sailings on a weekday with a queue at Cloverdale Street. Under the no build alternative A1, we've estimated it's a little bit lower, 32 to 42% of the sailings. As you work your way down, get to B and B3, 13 to 16% of the sailings. When as you go down to B1 and B2, it's 5% of the sailings. And C is 0% of the sailings. And one thing to also put in context when we think about the weekday is that this is over the period of generally the afternoon peak period. And so they'll have over the course of several hours, this potential, and so which we've described in further detail in the traffic memo. And then over to the right is the weekend version of this similar information. And with that, I think we're ready to answer questions and hear your comments.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I know that was a lot of information. Some of it is pretty technical. So we do want to open it up for any questions that you all have, CAG members. Part of your role and the advisory group is really providing us with feedback and helping us make sure that the information we're presenting is clear. So we welcome any feedback you have or any clarifying questions about any of the data that Mark presented. And yeah, just open it up. Also earlier in the meeting, put the 3 reports into the meeting chat. So one of those is the traffic analysis, if you wanted to pull that up on your own. And Victoria, I saw your comment a few minutes ago, your question about the projected number of vehicles off peak hours queuing on Fauntleroy Way. I know Mark just got into that. Did that help address the question that you had, or was there anything else you wanted clarification on?
Well, just observing from my home, it seems the queuing is only a couple hours in the afternoon during the week on average. So the bulk of the sailings go without a queue on Fauntleroy. Is that your understanding as well, or have I misunderstood that?
Yeah, Victoria, let me reiterate one of the things we're looking at. We, in that chart here, have looked out to the 2040 horizon year. So we're looking out in the future, which per the long range plan had on this route some projected vehicle growth in it. And so the way we look at that is, since the peak is fairly full today, what may happen is those shoulder sailings that are outside that today will be also full. And so it's sort of like it goes to a longer portion of the afternoon than you might see today. So that's what's
But Mark, does that take into account post-COVID, where a lot of people are working from home now? Because the numbers haven't rebounded as projected.
Yeah, so that's the answer is we're still all figuring that out, shaking that out, what that's all going to look like. I think, what I would say is, so that's a fair question about with respect to the extent. I would say one of the things we are definitely seeing in our travel patterns, and kind of interesting, just on, you see it on transit, you see it on the roadways, that it's in many days of the week has become more like what we typically saw on like a Saturday or a Friday type days, where it's the middle of the day that's become really busy, as people have kind of shifted how they're traveling in their times. And so, it might be that it slides in time, or maybe there's two peaks in a day that kind of happen. So what we're trying to just, obviously show is, given our the best information we have right now of that, I want to say it was 13% over on the Fauntleroy to Vashon, and 19% Fauntleroy to Southworth. When if you apply those numbers, this is potentially what it looks like. I would say, I think one of the things to think about is also keep in mind, how does an alternative look relative to today's situation and compared to the others? As we get into the evaluation and the Pell criteria, is that relative to each other's, that same type of information is going to stay relevant. That helps, sort of another way to think about it.
Okay, thank you.
Frank, I see your hand is up.
Sure. Thank you, Laura. I've got a few points, and I don't want to capitalize the time, but I've got a few things to make, so I can stop at each one and see if somebody else wants to interject. Mark, in your alternates B and C, you say they're going to save 5 minutes. Can you explain how you're going to save 5 minutes in alternates B and C? I think I know the answer already, which I think your answer is going to be, with a longer dock will allow people not to have to process through the toll booth. again, I challenge you and I challenge all of the CAG members to come down to the dock and look at it during the rush hour when the dual destination boats are going. There are at least 10 to 15 cars minimum on the dock today, every day, when that arm goes down. So please explain to me how having more cars on the dock, when you still have 10 to 15 cars waiting when the arm goes down, will save time. I just don't understand that. And I would really like to understand that.
Sure, Frank. Thanks for the question and the comment, and I'll explain what we are measuring here is the time to load to 124 vehicles. So if the arm you're referring to is to get on, obviously if you're after the 124 or 125 in fifth car, then that's what this time is measuring, is the time to do the unload process and the reload process of a full sail. So the savings is here relevant to once all of those vehicles are downstream of the toll booths, then that time to process is no longer in place. So that's what the difference is we're seeing here.
I apologize. I know this sounds like it's very coming from our side. It sounds like it's, self-serving, but I challenge you to go look at that. I think you are dead wrong. I don't think having 200, 400, 700, or 80 cars on that dock, the way it's going, is going to make loading any faster, because you load the bulk of the cars to Vashon, and you fill up the lanes to Southworth, and then they start 1s and 2s and 3s and 5s and to fill the boat up. And I think there's not going to be an easy way around that. So I would encourage everybody, all of us, to educate ourselves, because I live there. So I live right, I see this every single day. And so I encourage everybody to come down, and Mark, especially you, I would love to meet you there and come up to Captain's Park and spend an hour there, and let's look at 2 or 3 sailings, and please help educate me, because I just don't see it.
Good. Frank, I would be happy to, and I would share with you, I've done just what you've asked in terms of I live in the city. So yes, I would be happy to come out and talk that through.
Okay.
Do you want to make sure we're talking about the right gate? Sorry, on the same page about the gates, because I think the other thing to keep in mind is, again, we're replicating the scenarios, and it's got the load processes in there in terms of lane assignments and stuff, and I mean which gate we're talking about. I do want it to be clear. We're measuring the time to get to that 124th vehicle on the boat. And so that's what that time difference is. And so, of course, the model is going to mimic that and try to replicate that as best it can in the real world about what that time is. And it sounds like you're seeing something different than we can kind of talk that through about how it is or is not reflecting what you're seeing.
Appreciate it.
Mark, I think you helped to clarify a follow-up question that John had in the chat around if the model is measuring the arm coming down because the boat is full or because it's time to go. And what you're saying is to that 124
Right.
vessel capacity. Frank, I know you have more questions, but we'll bring some others in and then we'll circle back to you.
And I do, Laura, I see Gary's comment, and I did, specifically about overhead loading, I forgot to make that clarification in my comment. We do not have overhead loading assumed as part of these results you're seeing. That is, meaning that pedestrians are walking, there's time taken to walk across the transfer stand to unload those pedestrians and bicycles and to reload them. So just want to make sure that that's clear.
Thanks for clarifying that and answering Gary's question. Fletcher, see your hand is up.
It's a little more of a comment, I guess, but just that the kind of the quality of time spent is very different as a rider of the ferry when one is in the upstream queue on the road versus when one is on the dock. And the big difference is you have to idle a lot of the time when you're in the upstream queue because the cars keep moving. Occasionally there's half an hour wait or something, and then when you're on the dock, of course, you turn your car off and you're able to leave your car and go get a snack or something. So it's just the quality of the wait time is very different, both in terms of, I think, the rider comfort and also the environmental impact of all those cars idling.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that perspective, Fletcher. Marty.
Well, I'll just respond to Fletcher for a second and say that every car idles on the dock if the temperature is wrong, you know, to heat and to cool yourselves. But never mind. What I really wanted to ask Mark is that you have very different figures than we were told in the Ferry task force for the processing numbers. And Hadley and Trevor have been responding and helping me to try to understand what's different. But just to review, in the past, the figures were given to us in the task force. It said that it takes 1 to 2 minutes to process a car that doesn't have a ticket through the toll booths, and 6 to 10 seconds to process one that is has a ticket. And this was a campaign to try to get everybody to be involved with Wave to Go and to get buy their tickets ahead of time. And we really felt that processing was really an important thing. Now you're using quite different numbers. What you're using here is that it takes 18 seconds for a ticketed car and 30 seconds for a non-ticketed car. So that's only 12-second difference between a car that does have to buy a ticket and move through there. And that's a vastly different experience than I think many of our Vashon people have. If there's been used to be a big complaint about we need the bypass lane because it takes so long for these people to get through the toll booths. So I know that's going to take a lot of looking at for the good to go and the wave to go that comes in the future. But it's stunningly different from what we were told before. And I feel like it's a win for everybody if it's true that they if you can process if there's only a 12-second difference between a car that has to buy a ticket and one that doesn't, then everything moves so much better. And that would mean that your models are showing something that may be aspirational, or if it's really true, it would be important for everyone here in this meeting today to understand that queue is moving as fast as it possibly could, really.
You may not have seen it, but I did send you about half an hour before the meeting started some more information in response to your question, and a really good table that Mark and others helped produce that shows that the numbers that were given to the task force back in the Triangle Task Force back in 2017, which were draft public messaging around the benefits of buying your ticket in advance for a public kind of awareness campaign. They were just that public messaging. They weren't based on studies or models or data. And I didn't work on the task force at the time, but I'm not sure where Brock and Brian got those numbers at the time. So I'm not sure if they were based on modeling or just kind of guesstimates. But what they did is put in the table that I sent you at about 5:30 and showed that the lower end of that advanced ticketing messaging and the higher end sandwiches the numbers that are in this latest traffic analysis, and really showed that these numbers now are much more refined, but they're within that range, depending on whether you model transaction time, vehicles equivalent by minutes, or sort of how you look at the data. So take a look at that email. If you have additional questions, let us know. I know you're the only one on this group who was part of the task force work back in 2017. So we're happy to keep answering the questions if you still have.
So what you're telling me,
numbers.
I'm sorry, but what you're telling me is that that is true, that you can, there's only 12 seconds different from having a ticket or not having a ticket getting through the toll booths. Is that sort of where you're leaving it right here? I haven't looked at what you sent me, but.
Mark, do
Yeah,
you have that
why don't I,
off?
why don't I just chime in and that what I'll say to Marty, in response to this, the 18 seconds to 30 seconds where we went out and did field observations, processing time, and saw that range, and then working through some of the observations about what was pre-ticketed versus not. We did that in 2019, so that's what the basis of that range is. And so it's not like, it's not like guessed at. We did a observations over several days. What I would remind everyone is also it's going to be a bit of a blended measurement in the sense that right now today, yes, we're copying the Fauntleroy triangle route is during the peak period is pretty heavily pre-ticketed. We're already at like 60%. So that's the other thing to keep in mind is going to be on that lower end. That's not going to necessarily be the case all hours of the day, right? Weekends, different percentages potentially. And so that mix of where's it 18 seconds versus 30 seconds is going to be different. And then the last thing I'll say is I think the 30-second rate is somewhere in the mid 20s to 30 is something that's about the rate that from a planning perspective, Washington State Ferries is used in terms of its planning. If you're thinking about what's a typical processing time in a toll booth. Again, remember, this is the fastest is going to be a passenger car, single occupant. There's going to be a range that we're going to see for other vehicle types experiences. But I think, Marty, I would say we feel pretty confident about that range. And then what we, again, for the others, just to explain this in traffic modeling world, you put those parameters in and then you calibrate the model through other observations about like what's the queue length out along Fauntleroy Way, what's the total unload and load time, and how does that match, observations. So you kind of go through that as best you can with the current conditions to calibrate your model. And then last thing I'll just reiterate is, again, we're looking at this as to provide pretty good comparative data as we all go through this evaluation process, these Pell criteria.
Well, let me just thank you if that's really true. It's great to have better processing. I've been yelling about that for a long time. Thanks.
Thanks, Marty. So there's a couple follow-ups in the chat here. John, just clarifying that he's not talking about the model, but his question was actually for today's condition. So when he sees the arm go down, is that because the boat is full or because it is time to depart? I don't know, Hadley, if you want to start that, respond to that one in terms of kind of current conditions, or field to someone else on the team.
John, so you're just asking what the arm signifies? Can you clarify that a little bit?
Maybe John's having trouble, Hadley. I would imagine what he's saying is that when the arm goes down, is that just because the boat's full or because it's time to sail?
Well, it's both. It depends on the sailing and whether the boat is full or whether they're trying to catch up the schedule and keep on time. So it's always the captain's discretion working with the terminal supervisor when they're ready to send that boat out. And sometimes most of the time it's because the boat's full. If there's the demand, occasionally they will send it not full if there's another boat waiting to pull in, or if they're trying to make up time in the schedule for various reasons. So when the arm's down, it just means that the loading is over and the boat's ready to depart.
Sadly. Gary, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I don't think you're correct on that. When the arm goes down, that means that they're no longer loading cars, but they may still be loading passengers. And so that's kind of the crux of the question that you have here, is that the dwell time is the big variable that you have some control over. You can't control the speed. You can't really control the loading, but you can't control the dwell time that's reflected by the passengers. Hence the question of, why are we loading passengers both before and after the cars load? We could load them all afterwards. I mean, it may not make them happy, but it would actually save us the time of people walking on both before or after. I would vote to make sure they load at the end. The other thing, and the reason I asked the question about overhead passenger loading and offloading, is done on other terminals. And it would also, again, save the time, the dwell time for the boats waiting. And lastly, I know we're talking about the wave to go, but there's been some discussion that wave to go, unless it catches up to some of the other technology, it allows them to correctly identify not only how many people are on board, but how many people are adults or passengers, or there's a bunch of variables. So I'm cautious about wave to go. Using it, it seems to work pretty well for me, but there's this whole thing about passenger loading and how that impacts the dwell times really needs to be narrowed down. And my suggestion is overhead passenger loading might be a future. Maybe we're okay with it the way it is now, but maybe in 5 or 10 or 15 years, we want to save that couple of extra minutes off every sailing by having passengers load while the cars are loaded. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. Gary, I misspoke. I meant that when the vehicle's loading is over is when the arm goes down.
Yeah, I understood.
Yeah. So are you, just to pull on that a little more, are you suggesting that the traffic, we're trying to take comments on the traffic analysis needs to discuss more, or were you on the effect of the passenger loading and the timing of that and the operational approach?
It's really not so much the traffic analysis as much as it goes back to the fundamental question of dwell time. And I'm not hearing the emphasis on dwell time that I had hoped to hear. Hence, I'm raising it at this point. And maybe I'm out of order, so I'll stop. Thank you.
Scary. I did wonder, Dave, if you wanted to just say a few words. I know overhead passenger loading is, you've mentioned in the past kind of how that factors into the project, but if you want to just say a few words about that element.
Yeah, just humor me for one moment. Absolutely, Gary. We do have passenger overhead loading at several other terminals, and it works very effectively at keeping the passengers separate from the vehicles and allows them to load basically simultaneously. It's also safer. It better accommodates our ADA passengers. And we have done some work to try to estimate what that would be out here, and we can share that with folks. I want to say it's on the order of several minutes, which again, all these minutes add up to maintaining our headways and keeping your schedule. So all this kind of contributes a little bit. Thanks for the question.
Dave, I'll just jump in. And the traffic memo does have that information in terms of the estimated time savings. It's 1.7 to 1.8 minutes identified for time.
Yeah. Angus, I saw your hand went up, but it's down now. Was your question answered?
I think it mostly is. I mean, primarily, I just want to make the comment. I'm also a regular ferry load rider. Look, I mean, the gate closures are associated with, temporal constraints associated with sailing time, and then capacity constraints associated with the size of the ferry. If you look through the report, I mean, it's well tracked, kind of, what is the dwell time of the ferry, and then what is the load time of vehicles under these various situations. So, if you're looking at alternatives, B2, B3, and C, the load time is significantly lower, 6 minutes lower than the dwell time. And so you're effectively eliminating this temporal closure. So, I mean, it seems like the concern about the arm going down with vehicles waiting, that's associated with a temporal closure. And so you would eliminate that option. The other comment I'll point out is that there's this tracking in the study for, the reduction in bike and pedestrian traffic from a -1 to a +4, so a 5-minute differential there. In the pedestrian and bicycle loading time. That's all.
So Mark, I see you're off mute. Was there something you wanted to comment on, or?
No, sorry. I didn't. Never put myself on mute. I just been ready to answer the question.
It's ready. Carrie, your hand is still up. Did you have another comment?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Victoria.
On page 12 of your traffic analysis, it indicates that pedestrian and bicycle unload and load times are nearly identical for all the alternatives being offered. And if you had overhead loading, it might save up to 1.7 to 1.8 minutes. That doesn't seem significant considering the volume of pedestrian traffic. For Fauntleroy Ferry Dock. We don't have the volume that you have downtown or Edmonds or Bremerton. Is that correct, or have I misunderstood that?
No, sorry, you're correct that this is the time savings. So we went out and observed, we measured time for each of the phases. Pedestrian unload or load is around 1.7 to 1.8 minutes. And so the overhead loading, that's basically a direct relationship of what that would save. Remember, bicycles still would be that typically you still going across the transfer channel.
Thank you for pointing that out, Victoria. Frank.
Thank you. This is not a question, this is a statement. Had an opportunity to ride the ferry a couple of weeks ago back from Southworth, and it just happened to be I was waiting while the foot ferry came and was unloading. And I was just impressed with how many people were coming off it. And one of the questions we've talked about before was how many people ride that, because it was brought up of single occupancy vehicles, and the comment was that, well, if you have people taking the ferry downtown, the foot ferry, maybe they're not doubling up in the cars. Point being is I found out from the dock worker, he said approximately 400 people a day take the foot ferry from Southworth to downtown. So if you just add that to the, put that, 25% of that in cars and another 75% of that walking across the dock. We've all talked about why is there not more walk-ons? Why are there not more people coming over and using transit and things like that? They are using it, they're just using it on the other side. I don't know about Vashon. Maybe somebody else can speak to that. But I just wanted to make that because that was a question brought up before. And I have a couple more questions if there's
Thanks
time.
Thanks for pointing that out, Frank. I know you have more questions. I just want to pause here. I know we just have a few folks on the line that are Southworth contingent. So I don't want to call you out, but just invite either Malcolm or Greg if you have any feedback on any of this information, either now or at any point in the conversation. We want to make sure that we're hearing your perspective as well. And we have plenty of time for answering questions and comments. So we'll carry on. Frank, if you want to jump in with your next question, go for it.
Sure. Thank you very much. Again, I got a couple of, we talk about Fauntleroy all the time about the holding capacity and all the impacts that has with the operation. I was at Southworth. I've been to Vashon several times. My question to Dave or to Hadley is, does Southworth have 124 car holding capacity or 186? And does Vashon have 186 car holding capacity?
I'm going to defer to Trevor, who's also on this call. I don't know the specifics on Southworth. Trevor, do you know the holding capacity of that lot?
I do not right now, but I will be more than happy to look and get it for you guys. I know it's got 2 lanes that go all the way down from the toll booth, and then there's 4 other lanes, and I'm not exactly sure of the amount since the construction, how much we hold down below. So I will look at, if you're okay with that, Frank, I will look at it and have Hadley get back to you. Is that okay?
I would appreciate it.
You bet.
Thanks. Or do Vashon as well while we're at it. The capacity.
I'll defer to Scott for now.
So,
Yeah, Scott, we'd love to hear from you.
so I'm on.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you, Scott.
Okay, look, 2 things. First thing, the capacity for Vashon is well over 186 because there's the lane, the holding goes all the way up the hill and there is no stopping, and so it flows. That aside from that here, one of the big deals, the differences as far as the load with the 2 destinations is the fact that the cars, as they mentioned before, are mixed with the Southworth and the Vashon, and they don't come up evenly on the dock. And so what happens here, as far as the load is concerned, is the fact that it's an uneven load, and after they put in so much Vashon, then they put in some Southworth, and they go back and forth to try to fill the boat up all the way involved here. But by having the dock full of both Vashon and Southworth, they can have a single flow, and that's where the dwell gets reduced here. They can fill up all the load with your Vashon or whatever they choose to be here, and then fill it up with it, and you have a very tight load, as opposed to what Frank had mentioned previously about how you see ones and twosies going down the dock. If they're already on the docks, they'll have a single flow, and that's why you'll have a tighter load. And because I really question, you say you put 124 cars on there. When we have to dual destinations and it's uneven and stuff here, I really don't believe that you're getting 124 cars on those boats. In fact, I'm sure you don't, because again, when Southworth plugs the Vashon lane, then that's the end of it. There's no more Vashon going on there, even if there's room on the boat, and if there's no more Southworth to fill it, there's no way your efficiency. So the dock, having the larger dock, will make a big difference as far as having your boats full and tight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. There's providing that perspective. Vashon, I don't know, Trevor, if there's anything that you would want to respond to just from an operational perspective, or kind of your experience and what you hear from the crews as well.
No, he was pretty much right on with that one.
Just looking to see if there's any other hands up, or
I'm going to put in the chat for just Scott, if you're interested. I know you like to get some of this data, our public data dashboard, which does have a ridership by sailing feature. So if you're wondering about the number of vehicles carried on any specific sailing, you can query in that dashboard by date, year, route, terminal. So I know it doesn't fully answer your question or address the challenge that you're talking about, and Trevor's agreeing with you, but I'll put the link to that dashboard.
Badly. I see, Malcolm, your comment in here about single occupancy vehicles arriving at Fauntleroy are headed to either South King County rather than downtown, and the Triangle route really supports that. I know that's data that we have seen in the origin and destination study that dates back several years, and I know there's in the future some work to update that data, but that does align with the information that we have available at this time as well. There are comments or questions about the information we've talked about tonight. Frank, I see you waiting patiently, allowing others to come in. Thank you. Any other hands up? If there were other questions that you have, Frank, we're happy to hear them.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Mark, this is a question again for you. So going back to the slide that showed the length of the queue on Fauntleroy, you had the A and the B marker.
Mhm.
The A marker was at 1,500 feet. That's for 40 cars. But the B marker is at 3,000 feet. And if I understand that correctly, that should be for 124 cars. Can you please explain to me how come there's 3 times more car density in the same area? I know you're going to say, well, there's driveways and things like that. I don't think driveways eat up 2/3 of that first 1,500 feet. I could be wrong, but I'm just questioning that. Where does that data come, or how does that logic make sense?
Yeah, so 2 things. I'm not muted. So yeah, so Frank, I'm gonna go double check this, but so the distance is just lineal distance. And in the memo, so find the numbers.
20 feet per car.
30.
There's a lot.
Yeah, we had let's see. Haley, can you bring up that slide? I think if you didn't have it, we put in the memo the
Which slide was
number
it?
of holding, the one with the queue length.
The queue length.
You not put that on there? Let me look at it in the memo here. The memo has, pretty sure that we had in there how many vehicles are in there. So your question is, how is it there's fewer per the first distance than in the second distance?
Well, yeah, the first 1,500 supposedly holds 40 cars, 44 cars, and then the second 1,500 feet holds 124 cars.
Yeah, I'll go and make sure that we got that right, Frank. But we went out and basically, looked at, where there's the driveways, and there are more driveways, and then there's also the other consideration in that area is obviously approaching traffic signals. There's a longer distance that usually you can't be in adjacent to a signal. So let me just make sure that we didn't mess up on our math there. But we went through pretty exhaustively and measured how many vehicles each of those distances represents from a whole perspective.
I don't mean to be nitpicky, but it was just something I noticed and was just
Frank,
curious.
Frank, I just was looking at the text. It says the first 1,400 feet has about 35 vehicles, and 3,000 feet has about 85 vehicles. So I'm not sure where you get to the 124.
Well, I thought the 2 was the distance of the second boat. I was assuming that's what that was meant.
No,
I mean, or what does 2 represent? I don't
from the
understand.
toll booth. So
We're the 1 and the 2 here, Frank and all. This is representing a location from the entrance to the terminal, distance up. And so thanks, Dave, for finding that. So we're using Cloverdale, Circle 1, and then over to the right portion of the graphic, about 3,000 feet. That's the Lincoln Park parking lot entrance. The northerly one, that's the 3,000 feet. So we're measuring to that distance point, which Dave can say those numbers are 35. And
35 to the first point and 85 to the second point.
So, okay, so the second point is not the second boat's holding, it would just be.
Sorry, those are trying to relate, Frank, to at the top row. Those are relating the percentage of likely sailings queued at that point up Fauntleroy Way.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding.
No, I'm glad. Hey, this is why we're here, is to get clarification so that you all can make sure you're reading this right and we're conveying it correct.
Can I just ask, are others, was this graph intuitive for others? Because I think this is going to be an important point when we get to the screening, and if we need to make adjustments to the graphic or to the way it's described, that's certainly the type of comment we want to hear from all of you before we release this more broadly to the general community.
Bill Fletcher.
Oh, I just say I did sort of think that it was going to be 1 boat and 2 boats as well initially, and then I realized they were just labels. But maybe doing A and B or something would be less confusing.
Helpful. David.
Just a question on this chart. You list percentages, but now you're talking cars, and I don't see anywhere on this chart where it lists the number of cars. It just lists percentages. So would it help if you added number of cars to point 1 and number of cars to point 2 on the chart, so people that aren't quite understanding this percentages could understand the whole chart better? That could help me a lot too.
I think
I
that's
think
something
that's a
we can
good
consider.
suggestion, David. I think that's a good suggestion. We'll get those labels cleaned up so that it's not numerical, and then add in the how much holding that represents.
And also, I know that there are less parking driveways between point 1 and point 2, so I can see how there's actually more cars that could fit between point 1 and point 2. So
This is all helpful things we can look into. I know this graphic is especially complicated. Justin.
Hey, am I coming through?
Yes, we can hear you.
Brilliant. Yeah, sorry I'm a little late to the call and I'm many time zones away. But I just want to, the graphic's not too clear to me either, but I just want to express a general opinion that if WSF is going to rely on cars queued on Fauntleroy Way, there has to be an obligation on the part of WSF to actively manage that line, whether it's getting around parked cars or, you know, work trucks that are parked in people's driveways, you know, to provide services to the homeowners there, or any of the other chaos that happens on Fauntleroy Way. It's oftentimes not clear, even for really seasoned ferry riders, when and where the line ends and which cars are in line and which cars are not in line. And so, you know, I don't know if that's a WSF employee or law enforcement or some kind of boarding pass system, but there has to be some more organization to that, and that has to be considered as part of this plan. Thank you.
Justin.
I'll just offer, Laura, that we have this issue with most of our ferry terminals where the traffic backs up onto a city street or a county road. And then we work closely with the Public Works Department, in this case, SDOT, on how that's managed and enforced. But in this case, this road belongs to Seattle DOT, and they're the ones that sign it, and they're the ones that, in theory, that would enforce, you know, any poor behavior in this line. It's their property and their right of way. So, but the same issues up at Shaw Island, where, you know, we've got the same issues at the bigger docks like Mukilteo and, you know, up the hill at Bainbridge. It's just it's a common theme, and it's something that we try to work with our local partners. But it's something that we really struggle with, not having law enforcement at our beck and call all the time.
Just can I clarify, Justin, because I think what you were saying, and maybe I'm wrong, is if we're going to include this as part of our holding area to meet the terminal design manual.
That's right.
Rather than the overflow from that you're talking about, Dave. You're talking about with some of the smaller dock options, if this is going to be considered holding.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, I mean, I respect the answer, Dave, and I know that there's a lot of things that WSF doesn't have control over, but, you know, quite frankly, whatever we're doing now is really not working. So we got to do something else. That's the message.
We hear you, Justin. Thank you. Marty, you've been waiting patiently.
Yes, hi. So there's two figures I'd like to see again, figure 3 and figure 5. And I just have a question about one thing on each of them.
In figure 5.
Figure 3, figure 5.
Haley, could you?
Are those the
slides?
tables? Yeah, they should be. I made a note. Yeah. So, anyway, maybe this is figure 3. I can't tell.
That's
but
figure
anyway,
2. If you want to go to the next one, Haley.
what's figure?
Yeah, there's figure 3.
Yeah. So, this is just, you know, it's surprising to me, maybe, to no one else, but all of the alternatives in B and C, you know, save the same amount of time. And that was, I would have expected, you know, some difference, but so that question. Then figure 5, we could just look at that. Queue length, alternates, yeah, figure 5.
As someone who has the report, let Haley know which the slides aren't labeled by figures in the report.
Oh,
Is it this one or a different one?
it's a different one.
Figure 5 isn't in this presentation.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. So in figure 5, we have the queue length, and it varies when it forms. So we can keep looking at this one. The queue length for alternative C, when the queue forms, is never below 700 feet. And for all the Bs, it's never below 1,500 feet. And for all the As, it's never below 2,000 feet. And that's that figure where they're all kind of arching lines. And so that to me would imply that none of your alternatives actually whatever released the right of way for Fauntleroy, you need the queue. Is that wrong? I mean, you are planning that no matter what, how big a dock you build, that you will need it. You won't be able to say, you know, we you know, can give you back your parking.
Yeah, so those on the oh, dude, I was looking at there's a chart in the traffic memo that shows over time graph building up queue. It's the the relationship, Marty, between that is and looking at the peak of the peak, and you're correct that it's showing that again back to the graphic here that these alternatives build up to various maximum queue lengths, and then they dissipate depending on the dock size at different rates. And so this is trying to show that relationship then throughout the day. Correct, based on what that chart is showing, that certainly there will be queuing in that first part somewhere in the location one, whether it's sitting there or a little bit above that, depending on the alternative. So you can kind of put these two things together and think about that in terms of that length. So that's what that chart's referring to.
Thank you, Mark, for that. And then do you have any ways to help me understand why there's no difference between the B's and the C, you know, in that other chart, that figure 3 we looked at?
Sure, we can go back to that one real quick.
What does all this mean?
Yeah, so any of the alternatives, once you get to B and B3, B1, B2, and C, call that we're measuring the time to load full boat 124 vehicles. So under those scenarios, all those vehicles are essentially they're downstream of the toll booth, so there's at least enough time to get most of them down, so you're reducing the number that have to go through the toll booth, so that once you get a full boat's worth on the dock, then with respect to the time to load and unload the vessel, there's not a difference as you go in increasing dock size. There are other reasons and other considerations, sorting and other special moves, etc., that may relate to the operational efficiency aspects and evaluation, but specific to the load and unload time, they're the same.
Oh, okay, thank you very much.
So you're saying, Mark, once you get to 125 cars or above, the load and unload time is the same?
That specific piece of this, yes, Hadley.
Okay.
So you see queuing differences. Yes. There are other operational benefits, reasons to be considering that, but yeah, specific to load and unload time. That's correct.
Does that address your question, Marty?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Marty. Gary.
Yeah, thank you. If we go back to the operational efficiency queue length, which is a pretty interesting graphic, it strikes me, are we looking only at the 3-boat schedules? We're not looking at the possibility of a 2-boat schedule?
Gary, for the purposes of this traffic analysis, is looking at a 3-boat schedule. That's correct.
So we could, I mean, since we've not had very much experience with a 2-boat schedule, right? Only for the last several years. And hopefully we won't see that again for several more years. But I'm cautious that we don't ever say that if we build a C, we will never have backups on Fauntleroy. Because pretty readily with a 2-boat, or thank goodness we don't have these very often, a 1-boat schedule, we'll see big backups on Fauntleroy. It's not that we have a docks, an alternate C, and we resolve the Fauntleroy backup. It only resolves it for the 3-boat schedule. And even then, I think it might be doubtful, but I'll go with it. I think it's worth noting it in the documentation. Alternate C doesn't solve all the problems. It just solves the majority of problems when you run 3 boats. Thanks.
Thanks for the comment, Gary.
Thank you. There's just a couple of CAG members we haven't heard from this evening. If any of you have any comments or questions that you've been holding back, feel free to raise your hand. We are, of course, available to answer, questions that come up after the meeting as you kind of spend a little bit more time looking at the traffic analysis. Not hearing any other questions. Frank, did you have any other?
I did, and Mark, again, I'm coming back to you. Am I correct in noting that the scenarios you ran on the model were only for 2 sailings? Is that correct?
Correct. What we did, that's the time of the day we captured was the one sailing followed by another, as described.
Is it possible? I don't know what the effort is to do this with it, because I mean, this situation goes on and on and on. This like 4 or 5 sailings, 6 sailings at a time. Is there a way to see how it changes? Because at the end of the second sailing, not all the cars go away. The third sailing cars start backing up, and the fourth sailing cars start backing up, and so on and so forth. And so I'm wondering what if you would. I mean,
I would say, Frank, the way I would suggest that, that was like what you'd find is the purpose of looking at it is to look at the time it takes to load and unload the vessel, obviously, relative to the size of the dock and subsequently the good to go, wait to go processing applications. That relationship will be the same. It's just the dock will continue to be full under that scenario, right? So we assumed that high demand. So all that to say, what we'd be looking at is what if the dock continues to be full because this boats are behind. So it's sort of like we did with the queuing analysis. We would just work through how many hours of the day does that begin to look like if it runs continued subsequently high. Basically, that's what the queuing chart is trying to do. Is you could think of it as what are the implications of a vessel being behind, the dock is full. But the relationship about dock to get them onto the vessel is still going to be the same, whether that looks essentially late or not, unless the boat leaves half empty, right, or something like that. Is that making sense?
Yeah, kind of, but not, because I'm thinking that your scenario assumes I guess I should look. I did not look through the backup material, I guess maybe well enough, but maybe you can correct me. At the start of the first sailing, you're assuming that the dock is empty and the cars come in. So then you get 124 cars by from some time from when you start the scenario to when the boat leaves, because you have queue line buildup.
Yep.
And then before the second car, and then as the cars keep coming, as the second getting prepared for the second boat. But the third boat, does the queue just keep getting longer and longer, or does it keep going down and down? It doesn't just go away at the end of the second boat. Not every car on that queue gets in the second boat and goes away. Everybody's happy.
Right.
So I think it would be an interesting, I don't know what the cost and duration or the effort to do this would be, but to run that out 3 or 4, because that's what happens on the weekend. It's queued all day long. Because you have people, it's not just rush hour. They're going places all morning long. It's a 5-6 hour, deal. So I think it might be helpful to understand that. And then I would just bring up one last point. The challenge here is the queue, right? And when the challenge, it sounds to me, it's like dwell time. We always come back to dwell time. It's all about dwell time. You got to be able to unload and load faster, because we have to have this 20-minute dwell time. I challenge who came up with 20 minutes. It takes 25 minutes to load a boat reliably, consistently, repeatedly, every single time. Why don't we change the dwell time to 25 minutes? I know, Hadley, you're going to come back and say, well, that's a schedule rewrite. That's a huge, big deal. I can appreciate that. But, it's either you build the dock to handle the cars and the expense of all of that, or you just change the schedule to make it so that it works. And maybe that's very overly simplistic, and I will let it be at that with my comment.
No, it's not overly simplistic. You're right. We can make an hour-long dwell time and be able to fill the boats very easily, but that means less service. So taking 5 minutes off every dwell time for every sailing all day results in fewer trips throughout the day, which is fewer cars carried total each day, less capacity for Vashon and Southworth. And as you know, we went through a 2-year process to rewrite the schedule. And one of the commitments we made was not to reduce service to these communities that are growing fast. And, we're trying to squeeze as much service as we can into the service day, especially during that peak period where the dwell time is also, Mark, I don't have it in front of me, might 18 to 20 minutes is sort of average dwell time for the day. It's not the highest, and it's not during the late night sailings and the very early morning sailings. It's much less than that. So the dwell time, there isn't a magic number. It fluctuates throughout the day based on the demand. So when you have to fill a full 125 cars, it takes longer than those sailings that have fewer cars. So we plan less dwell time on those.
So the dwell times are different throughout the day?
Very different.
Okay.
Yes.
They do vary. Frank, as Hadley said, in part, sometimes due to just the demand. But then there are things we didn't talk about today, but there are other just process sometimes required anywhere. If they have a crew change, you will appreciate that, or they have to do a sewage dump. Those are longer, and those are fit in when it's a less busy time of the day because they do take longer. So, and then just as Hadley said, the relationship between the dwell and does relate to how frequently can you get on a boat. So, it's a service frequency value and customer service, right? We want to be able to travel, when we want to. And so that's what, there's a relationship there about that. And that just kind of going back to that, Frank, you're making good comments about like, what's the ripple effect? And another way to think about the time saved chart, there's total time to load and unload. The reason we showed that relative to the dwell times, those which are on the lowest, they are within this current schedule. That's sort of the 3-boat schedule. One way to look at the total load and unload time is really, it's an indication of how much buffer do you have between that dwell and how long it takes. And so anything that is a buffer in that is allowing for, some things to happen. It's like we do if we need to travel to an important appointment, you're going to give yourself a buffer just, to kind of why that operationally for Trevor and that great crew at WSF, that and the customers, that's allowing that buffer. So we have to kind of look at that. So is it going to be that exact that we're showing in the model? But it's going to give you relatively proportionally a good way to think about how this is all showing up across the alternatives, including what we're going to talk about in the future meeting about where it's good to go and way to go. Like that, if it can also.
Thanks
Okay,
for
thank you.
breaking that down, Mark and Hadley. I also want to just highlight some of the conversation in the chat here about kind of minimizing dwell time from John, just highlighting that WSF's resources are our boats, and we should be doing everything possible to minimize dwell time, and some agreement from Justin. So thank you for sharing that feedback as well.
John, I saw your earlier comment when we were talking about managing the queue on Fauntleroy and whether that's a WSF responsibility. Sounds like you were agreeing with some of the folks from Vashon that if we're going to include that as part of the holding queue, that we should look at ways to manage it more efficiently. I also wanted to thank Trevor, who did some research and talked to terminal operations. The holding capacity of the Vashon terminal is 65 cars on the dock, which doesn't include the cars that extend up the hill outside of the on-dock holding. And its capacity of Southworth is 171 vehicles. That answers that question earlier in the meeting. Thanks, Trevor.
Okay, working behind the scenes. You have some questions and comments from some of our community members who've been in attendance, but just want to pause to see if there's any final feedback from our advisory group members before we move on and close out the meeting. Gary?
I know we're basing all this on the 120 something car boats, but I'm curious if we ever have any expectations to put a larger boat on the triangle route.
Thanks, Gary, and I apologize. I just saw your question there
we're
in the
good. Keep
chat as
going.
well. Hadley, do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, our 2040 long range plan does assume through 2040, which is our planning horizon, that it will remain 324 car ferries, and that was a capacity increase. Right when the plan was released, we went from having a smaller 90 car boat and 224 car vessels to 324 car Esquire class ferries. That's the expected vessel assignments, which right now we're not able to do with our vessel availability, but the plan assumes 324 car Esquire class ferries going into the future.
Thank you. I'm done.
I do see a number of comments here from some members of the audience. We're reading those and the project team will capture those. We don't take public comment in these meetings, but we will capture all these comments, and you're also welcome to always email us at our project email if you have other comments or want to elaborate on any of your comments during after the meeting. But thanks for those comments and those sort of reactions to some of the CAG member comments. They're helpful.
Take all the feedback, all the input. I think with that, we can go ahead, Haley, and move on to our next steps slide. So we've talked a lot. I know Hadley outlined these topics at the very beginning of the meeting, but our upcoming CAG meetings will focus on the good to go and advanced ticketing study results. I know you've all been waiting for that information. That is coming up next, followed by the cost estimates and construction approach. Like Hadley said, we plan to cover that hopefully in one meeting before we close out the level 3 screening process. Marty, I see you have just one final comment in here about the real estate topic. Hadley, do you want to just respond to that?
Or actually, I'll let Dave. So thank you for that reminder, Marty. I meant to mention that at the beginning of the meeting that we sent you an announcement about the process to acquire the house just north of the terminal. So Dave, do you want to give a little update on that? And Marty's specific question is it for buying or renting?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We have been in conversations with King County, who owns the house just north of the terminal, about acquiring it so that we could use it during construction. That's our immediate need. We don't have, as you know, a lot of space at the dock to work and to stage and to do the house our construction operations. So the opportunities presented itself. We are in a process of we've recently notified the tenant, so we'd like to do some internal inspections of the building, and we're working on getting the property appraised so we could have further conversations with the county about acquiring the property.
Dave, Frank, do you have a follow-up question?
I do. Actually, I'm sorry. It's regarding the level 3 screening completion. Is that going to be a meeting? Is that going to be a standalone meeting to review kind of these options based on the table?
Yes.
As we did last time. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So we'll come to you with sort of the draft screening results and then get comments and questions and look at all of those results. The timing of the good to go meeting is unfortunately with the time of year, we're going to land at the end of August or right, before or after Labor Day. So just sort of a heads up on that. We'll get those dates out as soon as we can when we know for sure when that study will be ready to send to you. We'll send you the study at least a week in advance so you have time to read it and review it before the meeting. Just kind of keep an eye out for those dates. We'll get them out in the next couple days.
Yeah, thank you to everyone for completing our doodle poll and helping to provide your availability. I know this is a hard time of year for meetings, and we just really appreciate you hanging with us through this process and showing up and providing your input. I think with that, we're ready to close out the meeting. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Again, our recordings will be posted on the project website, and you know how to reach us at the project email. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any any other questions in between meetings, and we will be in touch soon with scheduling our next meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Good to see
thank you all.
Thanks.
Right.
Yes, thank you, everybody.